I felt this effort to make us all, and maybe this wasn't their intention, but it's the way it felt to me, to make us all amica nostra. We're all part of the messaging. We're all part of the effort. The boss is at the head of the table, and we're going to figure out together how to do this.
How strange is it for you to sit here and compare the president to a mob boss?
Very strange. And I don't do it lightly. That leadership culture constantly comes back to me when I think about my experience with the Trump administration.
James Comey said it. Robert Mueller just might be acting on it. The special counsel seemingly rounding up the president's good fellas with his sights quite possibly set on Trump. The Guardian says the news over the past 24 hours is a sobering reminder of how closely the president of the United States resembles a crime boss, struggling to keep his head above water as his henchmen are picked off by law enforcement one by one. The panel's still here. Eddie Glaude is still with us. Eddie, let me start with you. I think people project onto Comey all of their angst about all of the events of the last 24 months, but I think that seemed a little hyperbolic or dramatic in the moment. But if you look at the way these prosecutions are going down, really not so far off.
Not at all. And those persons who know Donald Trump from New York might even make it more concrete. There's always been this kind of underlying suspicion, given his work in Atlantic City, that he has had these kind of, shall we say, shady connections. And it seems, given the all-star team that Mueller has put together, that they've approached Donald Trump in this way. So there's concrete evidence. The analogy orients us perfectly. But I think there's something real about how Donald Trump is being treated and how Donald Trump operates. And so it's not far-fetched at all.
There's a lot of attempts to draw parallels. The Mueller probe is like the Enron probe. The Mueller probe is like the Mueller probe is like the Gotti prosecution.
Well, I mean, a lot of people made that comparison. It's easy to compare Trump to a mob boss when he sort of acts that way in plain sight. I mean, just take the tweet about Manafort this morning, and what the president is basically saying is Paulie's a good boy. Paulie didn't flip. That's what he's saying. Mm-hmm. And he's you know, I mean, his view of the law is incredibly selective. We talk about him going on the campaign trail. What does he say on the campaign trail? What does he want to emphasize? Immigration. What does he say? What did he say at the White House this week with ICE officers? We're a nation of immigrants, but above all, we are a nation of laws. Well, which laws? Because the laws that are seeing his associates prosecuted now, the president tells us in real time, those laws don't matter. Because for years, I talked to people close to the president all day yesterday, this morning, and they say he has this view of what Manafort did and what Cohen did as sort of what everybody does. And he feels that he and his associates are being targeted unfairly because now he's president. And that may be true. None of this may be happening if he hadn't won the election. But this is where we are. And in his mind, this is something that is, these are things, maybe they're illegal, but people just do it. But people in real estate have done it for a long time.
Why did he,
it's unfair that he's being targeted.
But that's he thought about this. Who did he want to make Attorney General of the United States?
Well, this is what
Jeff Sessions. What did he say? And I think we have, you reported this, or someone reported, what did he say? He said this publicly, right? He's so disappointed in Sessions because he thought Sessions, as Attorney General, would be loyal to him and would protect him and would use as a justice department. So the analogy, it would be a mob boss who thinks he has the cops in his pocket, and suddenly the police chief goes rogue and starts to actually get serious about investigating.
But where are we actually? I mean, I think with everything 49 minutes in, I know you're dying to get in. Let me just throw out one last question for all of you. Where are we right now in terms of the president's greatest threat? I mean, is it all of his conduct in office, everything we've been talking about, dangling the pardons, the tweets? Is it obstruction of justice? I mean, is that what he's potentially in the most trouble for?
Who knows? They're looking at it all.
For a lot of things. This is why I will just say, the only thing I object to in this conversation is we're talking about it like the mob thing is metaphorical. It's not metaphorical. It's real. Michael Cohen is like a childhood friend of Felix Sater's. Felix Sater was in bed with the Russian. Felix Sater was in bed for his life with the Russian mafia. He was an FBI informant against Russian organized crime. Donald Trump has been dealing with people in organized crime, American organized crime and Russian organized crime, for his entire career. This is not, and this is why the Michael Cohen thing is so threatening. Because again, to go back to the point that Schmidt made earlier today. The politics of this again, they have spent all this time demonizing the deep state. Now it's Brennan, but first it was Comey, and then it was Mueller. All of those people. Trump needs a bogeyman. He goes after them, but he goes after these people that he can point to, and they're his enemies. There's no one to point to in the Michael Cohen prosecution because we can't name any of the prosecutors in the SDNY. Most people at this table probably can't. Certainly no one in America can. There's only one face to the Michael Cohen case, and it's Michael Cohen. And Michael Cohen was Donald Trump's lawyer for 12 years. And so what are you going to do? You're going to try to demonize the guy? They've tried. Michael Cohen's a longtime liar. Really? He was your lawyer for the last decade.
Don't hire Michael Cohen. Well, who hired him for over 20 years?
Donald Trump.
Hearing Comey there reminded me, and sort of the whole mob theme, of the incredible miscalculation that Trump made early on, which was to ask Comey for loyalty. Trump never appreciated the subtleties of Washington, where that would be such a problem. He came in as a New York businessman and immediately turns to Jim Comey, of all people, and says, how can you be loyal?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.